Hey, welcome back, everyone. For the last part of our program, we have a Q&A panel with 4 members of the local literary community. We have Noah Falk, the author of 3 poetry collections, Exclusions, Snowmen Losing Weight, and You Are in Nearly Every Future. He is also the education director at Just Buffalo Literary Center. We have Kimberly Krug, the owner of Monkey See, Monkey Do Bookstore, an online indie bookstore specializing in curated book services and creative literacy-based programs and events. She also founded the annual Kids Book Expo that Barb mentioned earlier. Welcome to Alyssa Palombo, the author of 4 historical fiction novels, The Violinist of Venice, The Most Beautiful Woman in Florence, The Spellbook of Katrina Van Tassel, and The Borgia Confessions. And our final panelist is Lou Rera, the author of 3 horror, supernatural, and crime books. There Are No Doors on a Cocoon, Sign, and Awake, Tales of Terror. So we have opened the chat and you can ask questions for our panelists at any time. But to get started, I'll ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves so you can get an idea of their areas of expertise. Noah, could you start us off by introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for, first of all, having me in this space. And, it's really cool to be able to sit here virtually with you all and to learn. Like I caught a lot of what Marty's presentation was really quite informative, almost overwhelmingly informative. So yeah, my name is Noah Falk, Education Director at Just Buffalo Literary Center, nonprofit arts organization just a block away from the downtown library. And I've been writing poems for many, many years, and as Lee mentioned, have a few books of poems out. So really happy to be here.
Our first question for you is that your newest book, Exclusions, came out this August, which was a really challenging time for new books. But despite the pandemic, you found some really innovative ways to promote its release in the Buffalo community. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Marty sort of alluded to that as well, just the pandemic sort of rattling the existence of publishing in so many ways. And my publisher who published Exclusions was Tupelo Press. And the initial release date was actually for June. And at that time, they were sort of thinking, this will blow over, we'll just push it to August. August came around, and we're still sort of in this situation, but they had to release it because they had books on their publishing calendar that had to come out at the same point too. So just sort of pushing things down the line. And instead of having an actual release party, which many people do during to celebrate a book's coming into the world, one of the ideas I had was just sort of to have sidewalk, socially distant porch readings for anybody who wanted me to come by. So I would, most of these readings were happening in the neighborhood or, around Buffalo, downtown, Allentown neighborhoods, Elmwood Village, where people would just sort of have me over sort of after work, and I would come and read, 4 or 5 poems from the book to them. They would ask a few questions. And I think that the thinking around that was just reading, to me specifically, has always been like an intimate act. And I think presenting work can also be very intimate. And I think it's important to sort of give space and time for people to sort of connect to the work. So I was hoping that was a way to like, hey, let me read you a few poems. And it's still looking back on it, I loved a lot of it. I learned a lot about myself and sort of reading to strangers. But during the pandemic, it was almost like a relief state for some people, because it like again, what Marty was saying, they're either thinking about politics or the pandemic. There's really little space for anything else outside of like survival. So that was the gist of what I did. I also did a number of online sort of virtual readings, but there's been such an oversaturation of these spaces, and like, how do you present in this space that's actually going to be meaningful? Not to say that it can't happen, but it's just really the attention span of staring into a screen for 5 hours during a day is enough to hurt all of us. So But yeah, with all that said, I'm really happy the book's in the world. I don't know, the readership, it's hard to gauge. But I feel fortunate that I'm still able to write poems and be participating in that conversation.
That's great, and that's such a cool way to promote it and connect with readers during this weird time. So everyone, you are welcome to type in some questions for Noah in the chat. And while you do that, I'll ask Kim to introduce herself.
Thank you, Leah. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Kim Krug. I'm the owner of Monkey See, Monkey Do Children's Bookstore. We're an independent bookstore in Western New York. We had a brick and mortar store for just over 11 years. And this past September, I made the decision to shed the brick and mortar, and we're now a bookstore on the go, on the move. So we book sell all over the world, all over the country. I do curated book bundles. I do book subscriptions. I work with the schools. In some extent, it's been incredibly liberating because I've been able to do some more programming that is not just exclusive to one area of our Western New York market. It's allowed me to kind of branch out and break out of those walls. So it's been good. I consider myself on the move these days.
So as an indie bookstore owner, what are the do's and don'ts for independent authors to get their books into a bookstore?
I was thinking about this question that you posed, Leon. I would say there's probably 4 things that I would recommend. One is be mindful of the bookseller's time. So make an appointment, whether it's reaching out by email or by phone. I really discouraged when authors would just walk into the bookstore and present their material. It just wasn't always the right tone, and it's not being mindful of their time or space. So I always encourage to make an appointment, to connect online, pick up the phone. Make sure that the material is in its best form, right? So don't bring in pieces of paper and say, I have this great idea, I want to show it to you, I want to get this into your bookstore. Make sure it's in its final format stage so that it's presentable. Be mindful of the price of the book, and certainly do the research and your homework in terms of your pricing point. In terms of the marketplace, typically a hardcover book for a children's book is somewhere between $16.99 and $18.99. Certainly for adult books, that gets up a little bit higher to your high 20s. And then paperback books can range anywhere from $3.99 to sometimes $9.99. But be mindful of the price of your book, because if you come into the bookstore or try to sell your book and your price point is way above that mark, it's going to be a hurdle regardless. So that's one other point I'd like to make is the price. The last 2 points would be marketing plan and expectations, and having good expectations. So regarding a marketing plan, what I mean by that is, think thoughtfully about your book and the position of your book and how you might see this as being, impactful in our community, and what type of event or marketing angle could this book play. And I always love to help, kind of creating some type of special event or program around a book, but it's important for the author of that book or illustrator to have some thoughts in that as well. And then just be very realistic of expectations. I think, when I take on a book, I become I become a salesperson for that book too. I want to promote it. I want to advocate for it. I want it to sell well in our community. But, expectations are important in terms of how many books we can possibly sell. We have a lot of obviously books that we're being mindful of at the same time.
That's some really great advice. Audience, you're welcome to add some questions for Kim. And in the meantime, I'll ask Alyssa to tell us a bit about yourself.
Everyone, well, thanks so much for having me. My name is Alyssa Palumbo, as the author of 4 historical novels, all from St. Martin's Griffin, which is an imprint of Macmillan Publishers. The Violinist of Venice, The Most Beautiful Way. So yeah, that's me.
You actually kind of froze up a little. Would you mind repeating that?
Sure, yeah, I just was sharing the titles of my books, The Violinist of Venice, The Most Beautiful Woman in Florence, The Spellbook of Katrina Van Tassel, and The Borgia Confessions, which just came out this past February.
Our first question for you is about social media. You do a great job promoting your work and connecting with readers on Instagram and Twitter. Do you have any tips for building your audience on these platforms, especially if you're new to social media?
So I think if you're new to social media and you're interested in writing and having a writing career, I think the hashtag is a big one. And folks sometimes share things about what they're working on. So we start to follow those hashtags and start to sort of look at what folks are saying, join the conversations, reply to other authors. When I first started on social media, I followed a bunch of authors whose work I liked. I would reply to their questions and comment on things they were saying, and soon, you're having a conversation. So I think the thing with social media is to just jump in and, talk to people and see where it goes. And, sometimes you can meet critique partners, you can meet fellow authors to become friends, all of that has happened to me. And I would also share some really good advice, I think, that my agent gave me about social media when I was first starting to write as a career. She told me to follow the rule of thirds. So of what you post on social media, a third of that should be promoting your own work or about your own work or your own process. The second third should be promoting other authors' work, because that's just A, sort of good karma. But B, as writers, we should also be readers. And so talk about what you're reading and what you're loving. And then the last third, she said, is cats. And she said by cats, what she means is not necessarily cats, but whatever you're into, like readers, other writers, folks you might meet on social media. They like to get a little bit of a sense of who you are outside of your work too. And obviously that can be, however much you're comfortable sharing. Obviously no need to share personal life details if you're not comfortable doing so. But what movies are you watching? What are you binging on Netflix? What are you doing to stay sane in these COVID times? Things like that.
That's really great advice. I definitely want to see pictures of authors' cats. More cats on social media, please.
Yes.
All right, and you can post your questions for Alyssa in the chat. And while you do that, Lou, could you introduce yourself?
I can't seem to get my video to work here. So is that something? Yeah, start my video. I see it. Okay, great. Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name's Lou Rera. I'm a former professor of communication at Buffalo State. I've since retired, which is a great thing because I can dedicate all my time to write. I write horror, but I really write in the subgenre of crime and supernatural crime. And one of the best things I ever did during my time after I got published was to join the Horror Writers Association, which is an international organization dedicated to the genre of horror. And through that organization and the connections I've made, and especially joining the New York City chapter, and the connections and the networking that allows me, has really opened up a lot of doors for me in terms of how to promote what I write, instead of sort of floundering out there without any direction in this particular genre. So if I could say for anyone in any genre, whatever you write, if there is a group like that that supports your the type of work you do, search them out and join them if you haven't done so already. I find that to be incredibly invaluable. I just put out a new book in May with an association in New York City with the same group, Box 9 Books, and they it's called Awake, Tales of Terror. It's a collection of 13 short stories. I did one story in that collection, which was sort of a challenge for another anthology, in which I took an Edgar Allan Poe story, which is public domain, rewrote it. It was the Facts in the Case of Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. So it was kind of an interesting challenge to reimagine a Poe story and somewhat intimidating at the same time.
So you write crime books, and those are really hot right now. I think they might serve as kind of a comfort food, as other people were talking about earlier. There's something fun, a type of escapism. How did you decide to write in that genre?
Unfortunately for the people around me, they can never understand why I can't look at any of the brighter side of things. I always like to look at the dark side of life. Glass half empty, glass half full. It doesn't mean I'm morose, it's just that I like to explore the darker side of how we think, and everyone has that. We've all had nightmares, so we don't know where those come from, but I like to explore that side of things.
All right, thank you. People start taking questions from the audience. If you have any, the chat is now open and you're welcome to submit your questions. Our first one is a question for Kim. When you had a bookstore, if an author walked in with a self-published indie book, would you sell it, or were you just selling books published on a national scale?
Okay, sorry. I was just unmuting myself. Absolutely. I sold indie local authors, promoted local authors as well as national authors. So I'm a big advocate and of our community and a supporter of Western New York and local authors. Matter of fact, the Children's Book Week and the Western New York Children's Book Expo, which was founded 5 years ago by my mother and I, recognized not only national, international author and illustrator talent, but we looked right within our own community and focused on recognizing the talent right within Buffalo. So every year we had a percentage of authors that we would bring to and call attention to feature their book and make sure that we were recognizing the greatness right within our own community.
Okay, thank you. We have a question for Noah. What are some of the classes offered by Just Buffalo Literary Center for beginning authors?
Great question. Well, we sort of have a rolling workshop offering for local writers or writers from anywhere at this point. That's on our website, justbuffalo.org. And they change seasonally. So some are like for beginning novelists, some are for beginning poets, or at any stage in your life, really, or your writing career. So I would just sort of direct you to justbuffalo.org, and it has a plethora of information about all the workshops that are offered for really any age and any stage in your career.
All right, thank you. We have a question for Alyssa. What are the key considerations in writing historical fiction?
But yeah, so for historical fiction, obviously there's a lot of research involved. So you have to know that going in. You have to be ready to do that. That's obviously a very time-consuming part of the process. So it has to be it has to be something you're very interested in, because you're going to have to do a lot of research. You're going to have to do a lot of digging into it. So if it's something that you have only sort of a passing interest in, it might not be the best topic to carry you through for a whole novel, because not only do you have the work of, you know, writing, revising the whole novel, etc., but also the research. So make sure that it's something you're really deeply interested in and that you're very curious about, and, you know, can commit to really, really doing the work to dig into it.
Thank you. I have a question for Lou. When you were teaching at Buff State, did any of the students go on to become writers or famous writers?
Actually, yes. One of my students ended up being a showrunner for NCIS out in Los Angeles. And at Buffalo State, we taught screenwriting and film production. So a number of students moved out to LA. Some worked in the production end, but a few of them end up as screenwriters and have successfully done their own work and worked for Paramount and other studios out there. There is some of the students that ended up in New York City in the same capacity.
That's great. We have a question for Noah. In your experience, do publishers prefer cost-sharing arrangements with an author with an upfront payment, or is this something to stay away from?
You said cost paying what? Say that again. Sorry.
Cost-sharing arrangements.
I really don't know anything about that. So I typically, you know, in the poetry world, it's more of send your manuscripts and your poems into a publisher, and then they will sort of make all the arrangements on the back end. So I don't know if that's a situation with another genre.
Yeah, that might be a good, I'm not sure who asked this question, but that might be a good thing to ask Marty if you're able to get in touch with her. Let's see if you have any more questions. Kim, you mentioned that your bookstore travels all over the country. How do you decide where to go?
Well, I'm going actually now from the comfort of my home, so it's it's quite lovely. I'm going virtually. The silver lining for the bookstore, quite honestly, has been that it's given me pause to pivot the business in a way that I think is a sustainable model moving forward. How I'm traveling all over the country is in partnership with other indie bookstores all over the country. So I actually began a grassroots effort called Indies Unite, where I'm collaborating in really fun, creative ways with indie bookstores all over the country. We're working together to use the virtual platform to highlight authors and illustrators and books and stories, so that we're collaborating and working together, but we're bringing it to our own independent communities, which is so lovely. So, you know, I expect to be doing more work with the indie community throughout the country and bringing more creative opportunities in the virtual setting. What that will look like, it will look like authors events, book talks, story readings, book club discussions where we bring in an author and we bring in communities together to talk about issues. So it's going to be Western New York talking with California and talking with people in Florida and discussing different issues. So to me, there's this explosion of creativity right now and collaboration and opportunities to be a bookseller in a very creative space.
Thank you. And we have a question for Alyssa. Since you're writing historical fiction, how much research do you do, and where do you do your research?
So it depends on the book. The process always looks a little bit different for each book. How I generally go about it is I sort of do enough research up front to get me started, and then I usually write a first draft, and then I'll go back and do another big chunk of research to kind of fill in any holes and flesh out what's in the manuscript. And I find that if I write the first draft, that shows me where to focus my research. you know, it's a lot, and I think it's really tough to tell how much is needed or when to stop. I think a good rule of thumb sometimes that I use for myself is when I sort of know that I'm done doing research is when I start running into the same information in multiple different sources, things that I've already read. You know, not to say that obviously that means that I know everything. I certainly don't. But you know, if I'm looking for certain things to complete the book and I'm running into the same information, that shows me that I have a good sense of where I'm at. I obviously read a lot of books. That's a big part of the research. You know, online, there's scholarly articles and lots of sources available online these days, certainly. You know, and there's always things that you can find, like with a quick Google search while you're writing too. I know for one of my books, at one point I had to look up, you know, what day Easter fell on in, you know, a certain year in the 1700s. So that's something you can quickly Google and find the answer to that. Certainly in non-COVID times, I like to travel to the places I'm writing about, if at all possible. I don't think that's necessary. You know, not all authors do that. It's certainly not a requirement, but if you can, I do recommend it. You know, because sometimes if you can visit locations where parts of the book is set, or, you know, depending what time period you're writing about, maybe there's museums that have relevant information, relevant artifacts. That's all really good to look at as well. And then finally, what I would also add is that if there's music available from the time period that you're writing about, that's always nice to help you kind of set the scene. In my case, one of my books is about music, so that was a big part of my research. And then also, you know, photographs, maps, artwork, any of those visual sources that are available for your time period. So far, I haven't written in a time period for any of my published books anyway, where I have photographs available, but portraiture, especially from like the Renaissance, which is a period I write about, is really helpful because, you know, you can get a sense, not even really of what people looked like, because that's almost secondary, but how they dressed, how they wanted to be presented, what kind of setting are they painted in. Even a lot of times in the Renaissance specifically, sorry, I'm on a little bit of a tangent now, but you know, it was customary to set religious scenes in local settings. So you'll see, like, for instance, Botticelli has an Adoration of the Magi that's set in the Tuscan countryside. So it gives you a little bit of a sense of what the world might have looked like at the time.
Great, thank you. And we have a question for Kim. Do you work with schools, and how can a picture book and leveled reader author get their books into schools?
Yes, absolutely work with schools, love to partner with schools, helping them right now with, with book orders that they might need for their classrooms in their library, also working with them on virtual book fairs, which is the big thing right now, and how to get books into that's a little bit tougher because, I mean, obviously it helps when you have an indie bookstore or backing your book and supporting your book and bringing it to light for a school. But usually it does have to go through the layer of the school in terms of the librarian or, you know, maybe perhaps, mostly it's the librarian that will need to probably review the book and make sure that it's in alignment with what they want to bring into the school. So it's helpful when you have an independent bookstore backing it and saying, you know, we really recommend this author, this book. We think it would be a great fit. So I think, you know, it starts with perhaps the indie, and then, you know, they can help you make that inroad into the school. The author can certainly go to the school directly, but I think it might be a little bit harder path.
All right, thank you. Lou, what is the secret to getting media attention for your books?
That's a very tricky question. I did an experiment with Facebook/Instagram because Facebook owns Instagram. And some of the research I found was 47%, there was a 47% increase in visibility or user visibility if your advertisement has motion in it. So what I decided to do was run a test, and I did a series of animated ads that were like a 20-second to 30-second commercial, and it fit all the formats of Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, because they all have different aspect ratios for how things are shown. And to get to the point, I found out that a very interesting thing happened to all the people, that 47% increase of viewership. After the first 5 seconds, it dropped off 80%. So I had to realize that, okay, I need to do a 5-second ad instead of a 30-second ad or a 20-second ad because of how the viewership worked out. So, and I also narrowed it down to the demographic group that I was trying to reach. And then they gave me a breakdown into the age demographics and the male-female demographics of who actually was engaged in those ads. So through that experiment, I was able to target a little bit better how I could reach an audience. And through that mechanism, to get to the point, I was able to get 8 reviewers in my genre from Instagram to review my book. And one of those reviewers had a following of 19,000 people. So there's lots of ways, but that was an experiment I did.
That's fascinating. Noah, as an educator who works with students and builds trust and community, do you have any tips for how authors can build community with other authors and collaborate?
Yeah, I think what jumped to the front of my mind is sort of following what Lou was saying, is just, and Alyssa, the sort of sharing of the work of other authors you admire, whether it's via Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever platform you're comfortable with. I think that way championing someone else's work often opens up conversations about your own work and who inspires you and why you sort of lean a certain way aesthetically. So I think that would be the best thing, is just sort of promote literature, promote the work of other authors, and let that sort of naturally happen as relationships in those worlds do.
Great advice, thank you. We have one final question, which is for everyone. People say no one reads anymore. Say it isn't so. Anyone's welcome to jump in with their thoughts on this.
I'll go first. I think a lot of people still read a lot, and that also includes, print books, ebooks. But I should mention, though, that the increase of audiobooks has gone up by 16% since 2019. So I would include that into the reading part, where people are still engaged in literature, and that the vehicles that they can use to access that stuff are multifaceted.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And audiobooks have been huge. And it's, I can speak to that in the sense too, that my first 2 books were not published on audiobook. My second 2 were, and then my very second book that was published, I had an offer from an audio publisher come in this year, and it came out. So that's really an area where publishing is growing, where books are growing, where there's a lot of opportunity for authors, I think. But yeah, I mean, to echo Lou as well, I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people are reading, especially during, these COVID times, where more folks are at home than they tend to be. I think we are seeing people connect with books more often, whether that's, whether they're picking up new authors or whether they're rereading old favorites. That's something I found myself doing a lot in the last few months, kind of a comfort read sort of thing, which can make it hard for authors currently working and promoting work. But yeah, I mean, I don't think, I know a few years ago with the advent of ebooks, there was kind of this death of the book sort of panic. And I just don't think that is really going to happen. I think that physical books will always be here. They'll always have a place, and there will always be readers.
Yeah, and I would just say, well, just from in terms of the statistics, book sales are up, print book sales are up. So I don't believe people are turning away from the book. I think that people are reading more. I think that bookstores in general are an anchor in our community to provide hope, inspiration, distraction. And people are turning to books and reading. What, of course, I would hope is that they, where they're getting their books. Are they getting them online from, big box stores, or are they supporting their community indie bookstores? And, whether it's a bookstore like ourselves that have really now turned to an online and a store that can, we do personal deliveries too throughout Western New York. So I would say support your indie community, support your indie bookstores. They are the fabric and the voice and the vibe within your community. And, keep reading.
Great. And I'll just add, thank you guys all for that. And I'll just add that, reading changes as the times change, how you sort of dive into a book, or if you're on a screen, or just learning to read as a kid. And I think what's exciting most about books is the sort of diversity and the sort of anything you're interested in, anything, you can sort of find a community of thinking around that. And that's amazing. Like, to think that this industry, this sort of technology of reading is around us. And I think the big thing is, like what Kim was saying, promoting the local, talking about your own community. How can you feed that and fuel that in ways that sustain us as people and just the world? So it's really, I think the reading will be around forever. Books will be around forever. I'm excited to be able to be in this conversation with you all too. So thanks.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to share a comment that someone wrote, that all of today's speakers have been really, really helpful, and they can't wait to start networking with others. Thank you, everyone who has joined us for Indie Author today. Special thanks goes to our presenters, Avril Marie, E. Dolores Johnson, Barbara Sanchez, and Marty Gorman for their inspiring presentations, and to our panelists, Noah Falk, Kim Krug, Alyssa Palumbo, and Lou Rera for their wise words of advice. I hope everyone enjoyed the program and gained some useful ideas. We just have a few bits of housekeeping to wrap up. You can find additional free webinars and resources on the National Indie Author Day website, www.indieauthorday.com. The recording of this event will be available on the library's website, www.buffalolib.org, next week. And don't forget, there are 37 Buffalo and Erie County Public Libraries, as well as our website, that can offer you hundreds, if not thousands, of print and online resources for up-and-coming and published authors. And for the first time, we are creating a Buffalo Indie Author Directory to distribute for attendees. We hope this directory will help you network and build relationships with other local writers. And if you haven't submitted a bio for the directory yet, you can email it to me by Monday morning to mosierl@buffalolib.org. This is open to everyone who attended Indie Author Day. You don't need to be a published author. We just hope to connect writers of all experience levels. The submission form can be found on the Indie Author Day registration page and in probably any of the emails I sent you. I'd also be happy to email it to you if you just shoot me an email and ask for it. And then I'll be putting together the directory next week, and we'll hopefully have it out to you by the end of next week. You will also be receiving a follow-up email with a survey about this event. This is a completely new format to us, and I hope you'll share your thoughts so that we can keep making this event better in the future. Thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and happy writing.